Assalamu alaikum. Hello, I'm Saud Al Sefri, an endocrinologist from Al Hada and Taif Armed Forces Hospital. I'm very delighted to talk to you about a very prevalent disease where we are talking about type 2 diabetes mellitus, where currently we are having almost 420 million of adults who are living with type 2 diabetes, where it is projected to have in the coming 20 years another 260 millions to be added to that to reach almost 630 millions in 2045. Now, another problem we are facing with the disease is really the atherosclerosis, where it is considered to be the predominant cause of cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular death in those people with type 2 diabetes. Now, we consider this as a major global health concerns, where we have got a growing numbers of individuals, and in the same time we have got cardiovascular disease associated with type 2 diabetes. So in order to reveal the real picture of those individuals with type 2 diabetes and the prevalence of the cardiovascular disease among them, the CAPTURE study, it comes as a first global study to look into those. So around 10,000 people, adults with type 2 diabetes, they had been recruited in CAPTURE study, and in this it was over 13 countries across the 5 continents, and luckily Saudi Arabia was one of those countries in which we wanted to find out what would be the local prevalence of cardiovascular disease among our patients with type 2 diabetes. So this has been conducted as a cross-sectional non-interventional study of those adults with type 2 diabetes whom they had been attending those routine healthcare visits in a primary or specialist care centers. And this has been over almost a year. And in this, we wanted to find out what would be the overall cardiovascular disease prevalence among those individuals with type 2 diabetes. And again, in an exploratory post hoc analysis, we want to find out what would be the difference between different countries in the prevalence of cardiovascular disease among patients with type 2. And again, we wanted to find out what would be the difference in terms of their age, gender, or their clinical parameters. So these data has been presented at the annual meeting of the European Association of Study of Diabetes that was in 2020. And among them, if you would see, those are the most prominent finding, that 1/3 of those individuals with type 2 diabetes, they have got an established cardiovascular disease. Here we're talking about almost 30% of them. Now, the second fact that has been found among this study, that almost 90% of those individuals with type 2 diabetes and established cardiovascular disease, they have got an atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Now, the third fact that has been found, that almost 20% of patients with type 2 diabetes, they have got, I would say, the right treatment in terms of their glucose lowering treatment with a proven cardiovascular benefit, i.e. that 80% of those who should receive an treatment for their diabetes with a proven cardiovascular benefit, in reality they were not. So when you look at this and the highlights of this, it tells you that within the prevalence of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease within those populations of type 2, it was very high, and the vast majority were not being managed with the right treatment with a proven cardiovascular benefits in order to reduce the risk of their life cardiovascular event. Now, let's have a look at the GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1 molecules. Now, if you would look at their metabolic effect, we knew that it works on what we call it pancreatic function, and in that it works on the beta cells by stimulating the insulin to release more and more of insulin, and that it comes in a different mood where it is a glucose dependent insulin secretions, which is totally different from other way of secreting insulin. Now the second function, it comes on the alpha cells, where really it reduce or it inhibit the secretions of glucagon, where it raises the blood glucose. Now as a whole, that would reduce the glucose output from the liver, and the second thing, it would reduce the gastric emptying, and centrally it works on appetite by increasing the satiety. So all of this would have their direct as well as indirect cardiovascular effect, in which it reduces the endothelial dysfunction, the inflammations at the vessel level, as well as the atherosclerosis and the plaque itself, and it increased the cardiac function. With all of these, we would expect that it would have the benefit of reducing the glycemia. So by this, it would reduce the HbA1c. Again, one of their secondary benefits, that it would reduce the hypertension. Again, lipids, favorable effect, and again, it reduces weight. So by all of this, we believe that the cardiovascular action of the GLP-1 would help maybe in reducing the cardiovascular events in those patients with type 2 diabetes. Now, in order to study this, semaglutide, which is one of the long-acting GLP-1 receptor agonists, where it is given as a sub-Q once weekly, it has been studied in a long-term outcome study that was SUSTAIN-6, where we wanted to find out, by using the once weekly semaglutide, does it have an safety effect in terms of cardiovascular in those patients with type 2 diabetes. And again, this it has to be compared with placebo. Now this is what has been found. So this study has been what we call it event-driven study, and in this, those individuals with type 2 diabetes, they had been randomized either to receive placebo on top of standard of care, or to receive semaglutide once weekly on top of standard of care, and then we look at the event. So here we look at the composite endpoints of the 3-point MACE, and in that it has been non-fatal MI, non-fatal stroke, or cardiovascular death. So here, at almost a follow-up of almost 100 weeks, what we found that by using semaglutide on top of standard of care, it has reduced 26% the cardiovascular events, and that was the major adverse cardiovascular event. And that was very significant, because when it was tested for non-inferiority, it was superior. And again, when it was tested, it has got the superiority with a hazard ratio of 0.74.